Hi, Natalie.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can
Okay,
you
great.
hear me okay? Great. All right, there's Mary.
Hello, hello.
Hello. Hi, everybody. Good evening. All right, let's, I think we're going. Let's see what's happening on Facebook.
Oh, good luck with that.
It's always, the Facebook fun is always the exciting bit of the evening because it's sort of, you never quite know what's going to happen and whether I've managed to click all the buttons. There we go. We're gonna do that, and I think that's probably what we needed to do. All right. Okay. All right, well, we are gonna get going. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this, the 6th installment of Must Read TV, the Skylark Bookshop Virtual Author Series. My name is Alex George, and I'm the owner of Skylark, which is, for those of you who haven't visited us, an independent bookstore in downtown Columbia, Missouri. I am back in the shop this week, although I am on my own. Mary, as usual, is in Illinois, and Natalie is even further away. She is in Canada. I think this is the first time that we've done an international one of these. So we are sort of new boundaries here, which is all very exciting. Before we get going, I want to remind you all that we have, next week we have 2 events for you rather than just the one on consecutive evenings, both with writers who have previously been to Columbia as part of the Unbound Book Festival. On Wednesday night, which is the 9th of September, Christina Baker Klein will be here, and we're going to be talking about her new novel, The Exiles. And then the following night on Thursday, I will be talking to Caroline Levitt, whose new book is called With or Without You. They're both wonderful writers and wonderful humans, and they have both written wonderful books, and you won't want to miss either of them. Well, on the subject of wonderful humans and wonderful books, I am thrilled to introduce this evening's guest, Natalie Jenner. Natalie is the author of the international bestseller, The Jane Austen Society. Right behind her there, she's a pro. She's an absolute pro. Look at that, wonderful. This is her debut novel. And it has been a USA Today, LA Times, Globe and Mail, Toronto Star, Publishers Weekly, Vancouver Sun, Seattle Times, and ABA Indie bestseller. Phew. One of People's Magazine's best new books of the week, and a New York Times new and noteworthy audiobook. It was named as one of the top 10 debut novels of the year so far by Goodreads, was an Indie Next and a Library Reads pick, and it's received starred reviews in Library Journal and Booklist. There are a lot of accolades, but they are all very, very well deserved. Now, I've never met Natalie. I mean, we met on Zoom about 15 minutes ago, but apart from that, I've never met her. But it feels as if I know her. Consider these facts. A, she was born in England. B, she used to be a corporate attorney. C, she started an independent bookstore. D, she writes books. So it feels as if
4 out of 4. What else is there in life?
If you enjoyed this evening's conversation, please help us out and purchase Natalie's book from Skylark. You may have seen our post. We're doing something a little bit different this week. Rather than doing the Sky Coup, we have something arguably even more special. We have these wonderful maps of Chawton. There you go, real pro, of Chawton. And we have, I think, maybe 1 or 2 left, but certainly no more than that. So if you would like to snag one, please do drop us a line at mail@unbound. No, where am I again? mail@skylarkbookshop.com. We'll send them off on a first come first serve basis. We do also have lots of book plates as well that Natalie has kindly signed for us, so you'll get those too. And there they are. So it's almost as good as a signed book. All right. Let me see. So if you have a question for Natalie, please drop it in the Q&A section, which is at the bottom of your screen, or at least it should be. Or if you're watching on Facebook, go ahead and leave a comment, and we will get the question to Mary, who will then ask it of Natalie. All right. On that point, I'm going to leave you to it. I'm going to press some buttons and have it disappear. Natalie, it's wonderful to have you. Thank you so much for coming, and have a wonderful conversation. I'll see you at the end.
Thanks, Alex.
Thank you, Alex. And he's gone. And it's just us.
Us gals.
So Natalie, you were my final face-to-face author-publisher event before COVID.
Yeah.
You were the last author I got to spend time with.
I think you were the third last night that I was out for the past like almost 6 months. Yeah. No, my publisher, St. Martin's Press, had done this wonderful pre-pub tour for myself and Christy Clancy, and we had been started in LA, and we were working our way across. And then the third leg was the third week of March, so that got canceled. So we were in Chicago and Minneapolis, St. Paul, and that's how I got to meet you, although I had known about you for like a year, because you were one of the very first readers of this book when it was in galley form. Yeah.
Yes, I was. And oh my gosh, I loved it so much. I call this book a hug for your heart. And little did we know how important books like this were going to be for people with, quarantine and everything going on in the world. Just so important. So I thought we could start by you telling us about your book, and then maybe doing just a short little reading to give people a little taste.
Only for you, Mary.
So tell us about the Jane Austen Society.
So, debut novel. I'm in my early 50s, so it ain't over till it's over, because I tried for decades when I was younger with 5 different books trying to get published and never really got far at all. And I opened a small independent bookshop, like Alex said, in my late 40s, because I wanted to have books still be a big part of my life. I had a career in the legal services industry. I was first a corporate lawyer, but then a coach to lawyers. And I'd been doing that for decades. And 4 months after we opened the bookshop, my husband just gets this devastating diagnosis of incurable lung disease, and we have to close down the bookshop on our 1-year anniversary. And it was just incredibly horrible year. And the one thing I did during that year as solace, besides watch a lot of Cheers and Frasier and Downton Abbey, was I read a lot of Jane Austen. And the more I read her, the more I found myself wanting to know more about her, because she had had her own professional tribulations. She had essentially been self-published. She had had to buy back a copyright from a publisher that bought what eventually became Northanger Abbey. It was called Susan. They bought it and they never even printed it. Like, they didn't make the book. So, I was reading about her and going, you know what? She had a really hard life. She had 10 years of moving around and unsettledness. And I was drawing strength and inspiration from her story. So my husband was put on a regimen of drugs that stabilized his lung disease so that he's not progressing as fast as they were at first worried. And I felt hope again. And I wanted to stay in Jane Austen's world. And I wanted to kind of interrogate her text a little bit. And I was thinking about writing about a group of people trying to save an old British house. And what my book is about, as historical fiction, is it's about a group of people trying to save Jane Austen's cottage, where she spent the last 10 years of her life and worked on or revised all 6 of her major books, but they're all very different from each other. And it's at the very end of World War II. So they've all dealt with loss and grief, sometimes from both world wars. They're just coming out of that time, and they're trying to find a way to engage again with life and take chances. And the book is about 8 very different people from all different backgrounds: a doctor, a lawyer, a servant girl, a Hollywood film star, Sotheby's auctioneer, a school teacher. I think I said the farmer already. I always miss one. They get together and they decide to form a society. And this is based on sort of real life events, but not really. The people are all completely fictional, and the arc of the plot is fictional. But in real life, there was a real society that started during the war. And eventually the cottage was saved and turned into a museum that we can all go see today. So that was sort of the story behind my book, and why I wrote it, and why I was inspired. And and then everything since then has been just the veritable debut author's dream. So
it's just beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. And can you read us just a little taste?
So I am going to read a little bit at the end of chapter 1, where the farmer character, who lives in the town where Jane Austen lived and has never read a word of her, has run into a tourist who's trying to find the cottage. This is before it's a museum. And she's like, you have to read Jane Austen. You live here. What's your problem? So he goes to the library and he takes out Pride and Prejudice. I'm going to edit it down a little bit so you'll get the gist of the sort of the beginning of the falling in love with Jane Austen, which is what's happening to him, because he did not think he was going to love a book like this, and he gets sucked in like so many of us do. He was becoming quite worried for Mr. Darcy. It seemed to Adam that once a man notices a woman's eyes to be fine and tries to eavesdrop on her conversations and finds himself overly affected by her bad opinion of him, then such a man is on the path to something uncharted, whether he wants to admit it to himself or not. Adam did not know much about women, although his mother kept telling him it did not take too much. But he wondered if in the history of life, as well as in literature, a man had ever fallen into such obvious lust as fast as Mr. Darcy, and not done anything about it except to inadvertently and so successfully push it away. But as much as it amused him, the book also confused him. For one thing, he wondered at the father character. He did not think it reflected well on Mr. Bennet to spend all his leisure time barricaded in his study or indulging his humor at the expense of everyone else. Mrs. Bennet was much more easily understood, but something about the Bennet household was still amiss in a way that he did not recall encountering before in literature, not among a big family at least. He had read books about orphans and treachery among friends and fathers sent off to debtor's prison, but the biggest plots always turned on an act of revenge or greed or missing will. The Bennets, for all intents and purposes, simply didn't like each other. He had not been expecting this at all from a lady writer with a commitment to happy endings. Yet, sadly, it felt more real to him than anything else he had ever read. Finishing a chapter where Darcy shows his estate to the woman who once so robustly spurned his marriage proposal, Adam finally started to drift off to sleep. He recalled the recent visitor to his own town, the tiny cross on a chain, the white winning smile, tokens of the faith and hope so sadly missing from his own life. He could not conceive of the willingness to travel so far for something so whimsical. Yet an unguarded happiness had also radiated from within the visitor. Real happiness, the kind he had always searched for in books. Reading Jane Austen was making him identify with Darcy and the thunderclap power of physical attraction that flies in the face of one's usual judgment. It was helping him understand how even someone without much agency or means might demand to be treated, how we can act the fool and no one around us will necessarily clue us in. He would surely never see the American woman again, but maybe reading Jane Austen could help him gain even a small degree of her contented state. Maybe reading Austen could give him the key.
Beautiful, beautiful. So I have to start by saying I read some Jane Austen back in high school, and I'm sure you've heard this from others. I hadn't read her since, and I you know, okay.
You still might not.
You know, but I loved this book. And so my point is that you do not need to be a Jane Austen fan to love this book or have even read her to love this book. So with that being said, the title, did you have some discussions with the publisher on whether there was another title, or, I mean, was this the title? Was this in your head? How did that come into play?
I wish I had my little notes as I was doing a talk to the Jane Austen Society of North America Southwest region, and I found I do no plotting or outlining. I don't have any notes when I start to write. It's all going to just kind of come from my memory. And that year of reading I was doing was a year of unintentional research. So when I did sit down to write, I wasn't even sure how much it was going to involve Jane Austen. And I found this little pad in the first few pages I tore out, and it says, my new book. And then under that, I wrote the JAS, but I crossed out the. So I think at one point I was going to call it Jane Austen Society. I think this is better. And then I wrote chapter 1, and then I wrote exactly what is still chapter 1. And then I just wrote every day, day after day, because I'm a lawyer and I'm a creature of habit and I'm very diligent. And the title was never a question mark for me. When we were going up for auction, because there was a bidding war for the book, some of the publishers bidding wanted to keep the title open and not commit to it. But my editor at St. Martin's, he's like, no, it's perfect. It's simple. And it's, you know, it's just right. And so we never did discuss it, which really ironic that you mentioned this, because yesterday I was, there's film and TV interest, and I'm talking to, you know, these different production companies, and I was talking to one where they were saying, how much of this book really even needs to be about Jane Austen? Do you know what I mean? And I think that was one thing my agent had said to me, was like, you could have written about Virginia Woolf or the Brontes. Like, it's really about these 8 characters, because when I was writing, I really wanted to explore, I wanted to be in Jane Austen's world, but Mary, essentially, I wanted to explore more universal emotions about grief and living with grief and having to coexist with trauma and engaging in life, baby steps. And I think, trying to, through my characters, I call it literary therapy, find my own way. I just wasn't very conscious of that at the time. And so the title for me was a given, but I never thought of it as framing the book in a way that, from my perspective, could be a problem. And you know what? When you have a book come out, everyone's going to have to make decisions. There's so many beautiful books out there. People are going to see the word Jane Austen and then maybe like, oh, I've never read Jane Austen, so I wouldn't get that. But I'm blessed. The book has done well, and it seems to be finding people outside of the Jane Austen crowd. And I don't know why that is. I do think the cover is also particularly beautiful, and I think it really
so beautiful.
And I think that really helped. Yeah.
Yes. The fact that you have these characters on the cover subconsciously tells me that there's more there than just Jane Austen. And with her being, I mean, it's Jane Austen. Were you at all intimidated or a little worried that, I mean, you've talked about her fans, these people who have devoted themselves to Jane Austen. Were you at all concerned that some of them may come back and take umbrance with anything you wrote? Or yeah, I mean, they're devoted people.
Yeah, they are. I am too. I was too stupid to be scared. So to be absolutely honest, because I had never gone and published before, I said to my husband, I'm going to write again. He's like, oh, babe, God, don't do it. Like, it's just like, you'll be so sad at the end because no one's going to want to read it. And I was like, no, I'm okay. I'm good. I'm going to write for 3 reasons. Number 1, because I am never happier. I'm curious to know what Alex thinks. I'm never happier than when I'm writing. Writing is not hard for me. It doesn't mean that I don't struggle. It just means that the compensations far exceed the effort, and the ability to be in the zone, the way musicians get to be, or like I used to play soccer, right wing. There's a moment, you know, when you're on the field and you're in that zone. It's so wonderful. Well, with writing, I feel that way for 2 hours every morning. And then I start my day from this position of having escaped into a world of my creation where I feel some control, and yet I'm surprised. And I'm always so happy. So I love writing. And I said to my husband, as long as I enjoy it and you love it, I'm going to go ahead. However, it has to have more than a snowball's chance in hell of being of interest to someone outside this building that we live in. So that was like the Jane Austen hook. So I didn't write it thinking it was going to get published, but I knew that if I was going to do the effort, I wanted to preserve the option at the end, if it was good, to be able to go, okay, you know, let's see what the outside world says. We did send it to the actual 2 buildings and museums that are in my book, Chawton House, the main setting, Francis's home, and the actual museum on the front of the book. We sent them the early copy that you got, and they were great, and they're being wonderfully supportive of me. And I even got like a private tour of Chawton House when I went back to meet my UK editors. So like it's been very wonderful and very embraced, and you know, in a very small way, it's a Valentine to Austen. I think it's a positive message about why she does provide solace and why she is such a genius. And it's not scandalous, you know, in any way about her. So yeah.
You checked all of the boxes so beautifully. You were talking a little earlier in your research, you talked about the Janettes. Janeites, the Janeites.
Yeah. And in Spanish, I just learned this week, they're called Austenitas, which I think is like I want to be an Austenita, Natalie Austenita Jenner. I think that's just so great.
Beautiful. And who are the Janeites?
Janeites are basically just anybody, like we call them Trekkies for Star Trek. They're
Sure.
just a universal name for anyone that is in love with Jane Austen. And sometimes it's Austenite as well. But Janeites are people that are just totally devoted to the Gospel of Jane and think she is the best, which I do.
That is so lovely. So you talked about what they're called in Spanish. How many languages has your book been translated into so far?
16.
Wow.
It's still being acquired, but yeah, this all happened. There was, a handful last year, but a lot of this happened recently. So a lot of the translations won't show up for, until 2021 and well into it. But yeah, Russian, South Korean, Italian, Romanian, Portuguese, French, German, Estonian, Croatian, Serbian. Oh yeah, it's nuts. And it's, and Polish. And I said to I'm half British, a quarter Polish, and a quarter Ukrainian. And I gave my foreign rights agent, I was like, try and get all my heritage. So she's working on the Ukraine now because we got everything else. So
that really goes to the appeal and just how this book is so precious to so many people. So you have quite a cast of characters in the book. Were there any characters that didn't make it into the book that maybe you had in the beginning, you thought, or these were kind of right out of the gate, they just kind of organically appeared to you as you wrote?
Yeah, that's a good question. For me as a writer, my characters do just appear. They kind of hijack the plot a bit. They just sort of show up. And I don't think I edited out much with my book. I move things around because I don't plot. I get to a point, usually about a third of the way through, where I'm like, whoa, wait a minute, that should happen later. That should happen sooner. And I start to move stuff around a little bit. But the characters, it was always going to be 8 to 10 equal men and equal women, because part of the things I've learned in my research is that male fandom for Jane Austen had been super strong and as sort of acknowledged as female fandom until about 30 years ago with the kind of Colin Firth, Wet Shirt, Bridget Jones' Diary, which I love, but I watch it like, literally like on a loop at the house. But historically, male fandoms had been a strong part of her base. So I wanted to pay homage to that. And I wrote on that same notebook I told you, that was my planning. I wrote a bunch of jobs. And some of them made the cut and some of them didn't. But there were characters that showed up that I did not know were going to be in there, like the film star, the servant girl, the auctioneer. And basically I start writing and Adam, I see this man on a stone wall and he's sad and lonely. I don't know why. And then often when I write like I'm writing what I see in a camera through a film, so I'm transcribing basically. And so I follow my characters. And so they show up and I'm always like, oh, I feel them right away. I know everything about them. I know everything about them in this way that's very magical. And then sometimes I feel like someone's watching them. And then the next question is, who else is watching them? And if you were to actually go through my book, which I did recently because I'd never done this before, most of the chapters start with a character being looked at by another character. And that's the introduction of the next character. And that's because that's how I'm seeing them. Like God, like the puppet master is looking down and moving them all around like chess pieces.
I love it. Now there's a story, true story, about Jane Austen's ring. This is not her ring. It's the closest I had to the story of her ring. Can you tell us that story and how did it make its way into the book?
It did. It was a story I already knew. And then when I spent my year reading Jane Austen, I also took a trip for a week to the town that's the center of my book. I didn't know I was going to write a book, and I was very immersed in it. And I bought all these books, and I came home from my trip, and I think my family thought, oh, that's it. She'll be done with Jane Austen now. She'll move on to Downton Abbey. She'll move on to the next thing. And I came home with more books, and they're like, oh, God. And so I was reading all these books, but I also had very comprehensive knowledge, generally, pop culture-wise, of different things that had happened recently about her artifacts, the museum. And one of the things I knew, and I wanted to pay homage to this in my book, is that it would take a certain amount of talent to achieve a certain amount of wealth. that you could travel over to an auction in England or participate in an auction in England and buy an artifact that belonged to someone this important. And that's the movie star storyline. And in thinking that through, I think I was inspired to create a movie star character who does that very thing because of the real life example with the turquoise ring, which is that Kelly Clarkson, the American Idol winner and talk show host and singer, is a huge Janeite or Austenita. And she bought the turquoise ring at Sotheby's in 2013 for £120,000 at auction. And then the UK government put an export order on it saying, don't leave the country yet, little ring, and let's see if the museum can raise enough money to buy it from Kelly, because we really want to keep Jane Austen's turquoise ring in the country. And Kelly Clarkson, God bless her, so graciously sold the ring to the museum after acquiring it at auction. And I love that she wasn't someone that I would necessarily have wondered about what she loves to read. I love knowing I had this sort of bond with her. I love that she loved her enough that she would want to own her ring. I was very inspired by that. So the character of Mimi and her acquisition of the jewelry at Sotheby's at the beginning of the book is direct homage to Kelly Clarkson.
That's so lovely. I have one more question for you, and then we're going to get to some of our viewer questions. But I was reading and just kind of looking through what other people have said about the book. There have been some readers who say that they've discovered little Jane Austen plots within your book, like Easter eggs.
Yeah.
And there was one reader who said, I'm going back and I'm rereading all the Jane Austen now to see how many I can find within Natalie's book. So you've hidden some little gems in there, some little plot points.
Yeah, I mean, I have a crib sheet that I can send people if they're really interested. Sometimes people email me and they're like, I don't think I caught them all. And I'm like, here's my Word doc. Yeah, so basically what I was not intending to do that. I was thinking I was very much going to write this organic story about just 8 very different people coming together over a love of books, something that you and I, Mary, know very much about from working in bookshops, right? There's nothing like bonding with someone over a book. And I remember writing chapter 4. Originally was chapter 2, and I have a couple on a bench and they're arguing about Emma, and there's an age difference, and he's the town doctor and she's his patient because it's a town of a few hundred people. And I remember picking up, I'm not intending them to be a romantic couple, and as I'm writing the scene I'm picking up on a wonderful fun vibe between them, and I'm like, whoa, this is kind of hot. And then I was like, wait a minute, age difference, socially inappropriate, it's Knightley and Emma from the book Emma. And so that happened to me with one other couple, and it wasn't intended with them either. They're an homage to a couple from Persuasion. And then after that, I was in the midpoint of the book, and then I started to be much more strategic. And then I started to plant them. I started like everything, the dog's name, someone falls down the stairs. Like I went nuts. It was so much fun because I was operating on different levels, and I was able to step back enough objectively, I think because of my original intent with the book. I was able to keep it from getting too subsumed into pure Austen-ish consciousness. I was always able to think about what would be entertaining to somebody or moving to someone that just doesn't know these books. And I was trying to write on those 2 levels. I was able to, I think just because of where I was in life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we have a question from Barbara who wants to know, looking at your cover, who's who?
Okay.
She said she's gone back and forth trying to name them. So who's who on here?
So it's the 5 characters that actually live right in the town is the easiest way to do it. So that's Dr. Gray, and he's the one on the far left. And then that's Frances, because they're all in their late 40s, Dr. Gray, Frances, and Andrew. So she's got her hair up in the fur coat. And then the little one in the middle is Evie, although her hair is not the way it is in the book, which is Barbara probably one very understandable reason why you're wondering. And then this British Trench and sort of like 30-year-old, this is Adeline, the school teacher. And then that's Farmer Adam with his little satchel books. I have a great story about this actually, Barbara, which is that the cover had not been released yet, and it shows up on Instagram in a post. I was like, whoa, how did they get my cover? There's been a leak. I'm so important. That wasn't it. I messaged them and I was like, oh, thank you for posting my cover. And the They're like, yeah, we're the three women in the middle. I was like, what? And so it was three vintage models in England, and they photograph themselves, and they do the hair and the makeup, and they wear the little whack uniforms from World War II, and they have Instagram, profiles, but they're on a lot of the British. Mary, you've probably seen those, the girls of those types of books, right?
Yes.
And there are many of those. So I actually know in real life the three models for the women on the cover, which I think is so fun.
What a cool story.
Yeah.
That is so different than any other cover story I think I've ever heard. So Ben said a lot of lawyers write books, it seems. How has your legal training impacted the way you write?
That's a really great question, Ben. And it actually, I think, has impacted it more than most things. I think I studied English literature wanting to be a writer, but went to law school as my backup. I think I really did I always dreamt of being a writer. But when you study the great works of literature at university at that level, it's intimidating. Evelyn Waugh, Brides Have Revisited, is one of my favorite books. We were watching a miniseries, my daughter and I, this week, and every night we would end it and go, why do we even write? Why bother? This stuff's so brilliant, And when I went to law school, I think what I learned were the skills that served me in good stead from a habit perspective, which is the diligence to sit down every day, and no matter how much of a struggle it might be or what mood you're in, you just do it. And I think with law school, Ben, if you went to law school, it's very much like the amount of readings every day that you have to do, and it's dry, and you just learn to do it. And I think that really helps. I also think that in a weird way, like with poetry, when you study legislation or court cases, you're really learning to hone in on the importance of a comma, or a word being next to another word, or the use of a plural when it should have been singular, and how that could change the whole result of a case. And that makes you so in love with the power of a single letter or a single word. And I think that reading law cases and legislation makes you hyper-tuned to the value of language. And I think that really helps people. So then I think when they think about being writers, their choice of words, for me, flows pretty quickly. I kind of intuitively have a sense of what words I want to capture what situations. So I'm coming at it from a very different direction than a poet, but the goal is the same, which is to find the perfect word. And I do think that's part of the legal education benefit. Yeah.
Wow, that is fascinating. And I was a legal secretary in my previous life, and I write, and that makes a lot of sense to me as well. So I don't know if we even still have these maps available. There were only one or two when we started this, but I do remember when I saw you back in January, and I said to you, oh my gosh, your village is so vivid. It would be really cool if somebody did a map of it and you said, come over here. Here you go. Apparently I was not the only one with this brilliant idea, but who did this beautiful drawing for you? How did it come to be? I mean, it's such a special thing that goes so nicely with this book.
It's very accurate too. So I have a very talented friend in the village in Oakville, Ontario, where I live, Andrea Nairn, and she's on Instagram at Andrea Nairn, and it's Nairn. And what she did was I sort of drew a very, very primitive, grade 2 quality sketch, and I would say, here's Adam's house, blah, blah, blah. She went on Google Street and would do the satellite views and see this house here, has a bay window, or this house, the chimney's over. She made it so accurate. So even though it's very much made up, and these characters in my book, never lived in this town, the actual buildings have been done very accurately. And the one in the bottom right-hand corner, which is the great house, has been done incredibly accurately with its walled garden and the shepherd's hut, which is a major kind of plot element, and the little church there. So it's a beautiful, very accurate map. I even had somebody contact me through Instagram. I love social media. And she went, Oh, my mom lives in Adam's house because her mother lives in the town of Chawton, and she could figure out on the map which house was her mother's house, which I thought was really funny. And she wasn't offended. She was very, very excited. So.
What a great little connection.
Yeah.
Absolutely. All right, so let's see. We have somebody wondering, are you influenced by any other strong historical female authors?
Like historical fiction writers?
Yes.
Yeah. I actually I read very widely, and I think my notion of historical fiction is very broad, because most of the things that I read happen to be set in the past. So, you know, for example, I don't consider Remains of the Day historical fiction, but Kazuo Ishiguro has been a huge influence on me. From a female historical fiction, you know, point of view, I would say Pam Jenoff, Kate Quinn, and I mean, Christina Baker Klein, her, like, I'm thrilled. I can't wait to read that.
Oh, The Exiles is so good. So good.
I also, from like the perspective of male writers, like I love Jess Walter, and I can't wait to read his new book.
The Cold Millions. Oh, another really good one.
I haven't read it, but Beautiful Runes was awesome, you know, and that sort of taking place in the past. And I love dual time frame narratives as well. And one of the things I love about historical fiction is I find this evolution of having the multiple time frames and seeing the richness of how what happened in the past can still be part of today and the lessons we can learn from it, which is mimicking the very experience for the reader. And there'll be somebody in the book that's found a journal, or, you know, being in, you know, an attic or a house and discovered something. And I just love that kind of element of the mystery of trying to unravel the past. And I love books like that too.
And Jill she is wondering, for somebody who has not read much Jane Austen, what 2 books would you suggest somebody start with?
So I always say Pride and Prejudice because it's the one that is sort of the wittiest and the freshest. It has a lot of dialogue, especially at the beginning. It's really fun. It has a hate to romance arc to the plot, which is very popular from, you know, anything like You've Got Mail or whatever. You know, it's very much something that we're all very familiar with, the momentum of. So I think Pride and Prejudice is a really good place to start. And I think the more challenging one for me, I mean, I love Emma, and Emma's like my close second, but a lot of people have been coming to me this summer and saying that they've been rereading or turning to her and they're loving Persuasion. So I think Persuasion, especially for anybody like me in midlife who can look back on life and the choices we make and don't make, Persuasion is very much about how you can always redirect course and you can always find happiness and hope. And it's a very, it's an elegy and it's full of grief, but it's also full of renewal and hope. And I just think it really resonates with people now, especially. So I think those are the 2 I would probably recommend right now. And if you ask me in 3 months, I'm sure I'd have a different answer.
Sure. No doubt. No doubt. You talked about writing in the morning. Is that your kind of set in stone routine? Do you sit down every day and write no matter what's at the same time?
I say I do, but I don't. I'm somebody who I believe in writing when I feel like it, which happens to be almost every morning because I look forward to doing it. So I would say probably 4 to 6 mornings of the week. And there are weeks where it's 7 that I will write, and I get woken up by my characters having conversations. And I'll try and scribble it down and go back to bed, but it doesn't matter. And my husband says he can feel the energy like rising. He's like, you're awake. So I go and I write. I also like writing in the early morning, Mary. And I know you're writing too, but like from 5 to 7, you don't have the bad email yet. Nothing's gone super horrific in the news usually yet, you know, wait till 7 or 7:30. But so I find that it's a really nice quiet time. And I really love feeling also renewed. You know, I've woken up and I'm ready to go. But that said, I wrote last night for 2 hours. I will write at any time of the day that I feel like it, but I think I'm at my best when I first wake up. So,
yeah, I completely relate to that. That's just when I'm fresh, and it's like everybody's whatever story is in me. That's when it's just jumping to get out before it gets weighed down with all those other thoughts.
Yeah.
So Jill would like to know what you're reading right now.
What am I reading right now? Because I'm writing my next book. which I'll tell you about if you want some scoops.
Yeah.
It doesn't take me very long to do a first draft, and then I'll spend months, building it forward. I add on, I don't edit down because I'm very vain. So I was like, I don't like killing my darlings, So I tend to have a lean first draft, and I tend to add about 15 to 20,000 words like every draft. Okay. And so right now, technically, I'm not reading any fiction, which is really embarrassing to admit, but it's because I don't like absorbing other writers' voice, talent, and ideas. But some amazing books that I've read, and one that's coming out in October that I read I read a few months ago, is Cuyahoga by Beatty. Oh my gosh, if anyone loves like William Faulkner crossed with, I don't know, the Coen brothers, like, you have to read this book. It's so amazing.
That's a good description for it.
Yeah, no, I loved it. The All Night Sun by Diane Zinna, which came out last month. Bronte's Mistress by Jane Austen. So If anyone is really into the Brontes, that's just an amazing historical fiction book. And I should have mentioned that earlier because it's actually a debut book. It's had a huge influence on me as a historical fiction writer. So well done. And yeah, so I mean, those are just some of the titles that like pop out. So I read a lot of debuts right now. I think everyone I just mentioned to you was a debut author because I'm part of a group on Facebook, and we're all sort of like share early reading copies with each other. So it's really fun. And my next book.
Yes, Karen and Elizabeth both want to know, what are you working on next?
Yeah. So it's historical fiction again, and it's set in the early 1950s in London, England. And Alex will like this. It's set in a bookshop, and it has connective tissue with the Jane Austen Society. And there will be an announcement this fall. It won't be coming out for a while because my paperback will be coming out next May, so it'll be coming out after that. But my scoop is that it is going to follow the character of Evie, the servant girl who's gone off to Cambridge. So nobody else knows that, so don't say anything.
Big scoop, big scoop. Keep it to yourselves, Janeites.
So important.
So that is another question that somebody had. Do you hide your work until it's done, or do you have some early trusted readers that you bring in right at the beginning?
Yeah, no, I'm terrible. I am so wildly suspicious and private about it. I think that for me, because I don't plot and because it feels very organic, I never want anyone to say anything and get it in my head. Like, I thought they were going to get together, and I'm worried about it sort of shifting the energy as I write. So no one ever sees my first two drafts except my husband. Like, he sees everything. So usually what I do is I give my husband the first draft when I'm halfway through, because I don't want to write a whole book and just have him go, oh no, like stop, right? So he gets the first half, then he gets the whole first draft, which is usually around 50 to 60,000 words. Then I go back. Then I get it to a publishable size, sort of 70 to 80. And that's the size that my agent gets. And nobody else gets to see it. And if my husband likes it and my agent likes it, it's worked so far. Then usually my agent just wants a bit more of everything. And then usually we get it to about 90,000 words. And that's the third draft. But I edit as I go. So I know I'm making this sound like I don't have a lot of drafts, but I don't go ahead in the book when I'm writing. I don't, the next morning, I don't write a new word until I'm happy with what I wrote the day before. So after my morning's effort, I spend the rest of the day going back to what I wrote, my 2,000 words, maybe it's 1,000 words. And I make sure I love it and it's organic and it's flowing and I like what's happened. And if not, I keep working on it. And then the next day I'm ready to go again. So I edit very aggressively. And I think, going back to Ben's earlier question, I think that's part of the legal training, And then that's why it sounds like it's just a few drafts, but I've actually really rigorously edited as I've gone along.
Sure. That makes total sense from a legal perspective as well. As the legal assistant who used to have to make the changes for my bosses as they'd edit going along, I can relate to that completely. So somebody also asked, they said Austen spinoffs are almost a genre to themselves. Do you read many of those, and are there any that you love?
Yeah, I do. I find what happens with me with Jane Austen is when I read one of her books, I want to stay in her world. And so I tend to go, oh, what's a new Pride and Prejudice spinoff? So I really, really, really idolize Curtis Sittenfeld as an author. Her version of Pride and Prejudice called Eligible is just a really fun homage to Pride and Prejudice, the pastiche. And it's got a bit of a twist. It's kind of got like a Bachelor TV show storyline to it. I've read that a few times. I also love the Jane Austen Project. It's by Kathleen Flynn. She's an editor with the New York Times. And it's time travel. Two people go back in time from the near future to try and find Jane Austen and save her before she dies, and find the end of the Watsons, which is one of her unfinished manuscripts. And it's really sexy and fun, and it's great time travel. And everyone who reads that book always says to me afterwards, you're right, that's like such a great book. I love Bridget Jones' Diary. I think it's brilliant. In fact, some of my team at St. Martin's were at her publisher and worked on that book. And I was just like, I could have kissed her shoes. I was so in awe when I met them, just for working on branding her book, because I just thought Bridget Jones' Diary is just one of the comedic, masterpieces of the late 20th century. It's so beautiful. And and then there's an up and coming debut author, Molly Greeley, and she has written a book that is a continuation of Charlotte Lucas's life, being married to Mr. Collins from Pride and Prejudice. But it's just a lovely, beautiful, almost D.H. Lawrence-like pastoral book, gorgeous. She has a new one coming out called The Heiress, which is about Anne de Burgh, and it's tracing Anne de Burgh's life after Pride and Prejudice, and it is one of the best books I've read in a while. It's fascinating. Wow. So those are some of the, yeah. And if anyone likes completions, there's a very talented Irish novelist, Rose Servatova, and she has completed the Watsons. She did such an amazing job. I couldn't tell where Austen left, and she picked up. So I read a lot of them, and I enjoy them all.
It comes through in your excitement, sharing them with everybody here. Deborah wants to know, she says, the British cover is different.
Yes.
As I believe often is the case with international covers.
Yes.
Did you have any input onto that cover, those decisions?
No, I tried to be low maintenance, which is not my nature, but I was just so happy to get published that I was just like, they give me the cover. I'm like, yeah, that's great. But I'm sure I'll be different the next time. That said, I did love both covers. The UK company Orion, which is a division of Hachette, they did what is more of a British cover. British covers tend to be more object based, and they tend to have a bit of a background pattern, and they will have symbols, or they'll have a big singular photograph. So that is a bit of a style choice over there. They don't tend to have our typical historical fiction book covers, Mary, which you would be very familiar with, right? Mm-hmm. Which is often with someone's back.
Yes.
Trying to project yourself, right, into what they're looking at and where they're coming from. Ironically, the Australian New Zealand team for Orion, because Orion did the Commonwealth, they actually picked the US cover.
Ah.
So different parts of the Commonwealth are using different covers. And I think South Africa might be doing that one as well. So it's very much a choice based on their market. And I know nothing about cover design, so I try to stay out of it. I will say that I said to my agent, I have one request for my cover, for a North American one, because that was the first cover. So I just don't want the back of somebody on the cover. So I don't know why. I don't like, it's just not my, I don't think it's my book. And then when I got the document, I opened it and it was like 5 backs. And I was like, oh my God, are they trying to give me a heart attack? But then I realized very quickly that it was the perfect cover, because they're banded together and they're facing what they're trying to save, but they're also facing the sky, they're facing the future. And I love those huge Rembrandt-esque flowers.
Yes.
Corners that give it this incredible symmetry. I think it's like a poster. I think it's gorgeous.
It is. It when you revealed this cover, it was just so perfect for the book, that was already in my head. It's just absolutely gorgeous. We have a couple of interesting questions here. So, so Laura wants to know your favorite Austen book, your favorite Austen character, and then which Austen character would you be?
Okay, I can do this. I got this. Pride and Prejudice, Elizabeth Bennet from Pride and Prejudice, and I would love to be Lizzie. She is my favorite character in all literature. She's a lot of people's favorite female character in literature. I think she's so delightful. I would love to be her. I'd love to have her healthy ego. She's just a really wonderful, strong female character who holds true to what she wants. I'd like to be her, but I tell people that I fear I'm an Emma. So you can't tell I don't mind the spotlight. My family says that, you know, this process of watching me, you know, do events like every day, like, are you not sick of talking about yourself? I'm like, no, sadly, no. So, and that's Emma.
I can keep going. And this, so do you partake in snail mail correspondence? You know, Austen's mail turned into such a historical reference. What do you think that our modern way of corresponding brings or takes away for future?
So I don't do snail mail correspondence. I am, unfortunately, a huge emailer. However, I do regret it. And one of Rose Servatova that I was mentioning that completed the Watsons, she actually sent me snail mail and a few little gifts for my launch. It was so sweet. And I just sat there with that letter and I kept that letter. And of all the things that have happened to me the past few months, that's what I've kept. And I think that's what we're losing, right? Is that the memory box of life. And I want to just put a quick pitch in for an amazing book. Lit Hub just profiled it. It's coming out on September 15th. It's Pride and Prejudice by Barbara Heller. She's a set designer. She's worked on like Nancy Meyers movies and stuff. She has taken all the letters from Pride and Prejudice and recreated them with calligraphists. And then the letters actually exist in the book in cellophane pockets. And you actually open the letter as if it was the letter from Lydia saying, I'm hightailing it to Mary Wickham. Like, and everything's done in different people's penmanship. And there's postal marks. And it's Barbara Heller, Heller. And I just got it in the mail this week. And it is unbelievably, it's a perfect present for anyone that loves Pride and Prejudice, like hands down. It's what you should all be getting your moms for Christmas if they love Pride and Prejudice. And I looked at it and I was like, gosh, you know, people kept these letters from people in their lives and you do go back to them. And I think, yeah, I do very much wish that it's one of those things I do actually actively regret. And I think that if life lent itself to it, I would love to do it. Rose did for me. And I will certainly at least be writing to Rose because it was so lovely that she sent me a letter.
Yeah. Letters are still, every little note I get from an author is in a box right back there.
Yeah. I kept everything.
Every little postcard, every little note, yeah. I keep them all. They're precious, absolutely precious. All right, we have a few more questions here. They've been coming fast and furious, so I apologize if I've missed some of yours. Let's see. Can you tell us a little bit about what your bookstore was like when you had it?
Oh, it's so sweet. I wish I had a picture to show you, but if you go on Facebook and you look up Archetype Books, so it's like a literary archetype, ARCHETYPE Books. That's my store. And it was 450 square feet. It was an old jewelry store and it was on an alley in a side lane and it was behind a restaurant. And I looked through the bay window and I could see these beautiful dark floorboards and then halogen lights for displaying the jewels, like highlighting the cases. And we knew, and beautiful dark blue walls. And we knew all we had to get were those Billy bookcases from IKEA. And we got them in the dark espresso brown. And my husband put them all up like in like a couple of days. And then we ordered, 1,000 books. And then we were off to the races. And we got our bookstore up and running in under 3 weeks from the time we got the space. Yeah. It was it was wild, but it was because it was right before Christmas. And one of my friends that owns a bookstore said, if you don't open before Christmas, just wait. Like, don't even pay the rent because it just, you guys know, it's dramatically. I mean, one of the things I would say to everybody is what they don't realize about independent bookstores is that we're very dependent on certain seasons. And one of the horrible things about the pandemic is it's interrupted some of those key seasons, especially for the bookstores in the tourist areas, you know? So I've been doing events at places like Rhode Island, for example, and or Provincetown. It's really hard on them. They were really relying on that tourist traffic. And so I'm just very much always saying to people, like, if you can, like, even just one book makes a difference, especially because we don't know what Christmas is going to look like. You know, you have a big election coming up, like there's a lot of stuff going on. So very much think about like Christmas, if things are not going great, bookstores desperately need, you know, a lot of purchasing, especially at Christmas, to get them through the quiet winter months. But my bookstore was very small and quaint, and it carried a little bit of everything. It had a children's corner. Look, I'm just getting misty talking about it. No one's asked me that question before. Thank you. It was very adorable.
I imagine it must have been. And you're so right. The indie bookstores are suffering right now, and we're so grateful to have the Zoom platform and to be able to talk to authors, but it's also been hard on authors who have not been able to tour in the same way, and publicize their books and bring them in front of readers, which is, you know, we as booksellers are working double, triple time to do that. And that's why we're really appreciative if you are here and you're with us and you're interacting with Natalie tonight. If you'll order her book.
Or anyone's book.
Yes, order somebody's book from us tonight. And, you know, you do that by sending an email to mail@skylarkbookshop.com. There is another way, and Peggy said earlier on that she was listening to your audiobook in the wee hours of Monday morning while she was sitting up with her dying cat, and your conversations about grief and reading Austen while not being able to read anything else brought her so much solace. And audiobooks are another way, and you know, that's another way that readers can also support their indie bookstores through libro.fm. If you listen to audiobooks, I implore you, if you are with that other service, to switch to libro.fm and select Skylark Bookshop as your preferred bookshop, and a portion of every purchase then goes back to that bookstore, and your credits never expire. And booksellers like me go on to Libro FM, and we leave these glowing reviews of these audiobooks that we love. But you know, Peggy obviously was very moved by the audiobook of the Jane Austen Society.
Yeah, I mean, Peggy, obviously, I mean, I have 2 rescue dogs, and I know how difficult it is. I'm very, very sorry. I did write my book at a time in my life, and I continue to be worried. My husband has a genetic and terminal illness, so we don't know how long he has, and I'm having to live very much in the moment, but he has outlived the statistics. But this book was written in a time where I was very much deeply concerned about his health and trying to find a way to still be a present wife and a present mother and a present daughter and friend. And it was really difficult on me. And I didn't do a great job. You know, I really read a lot of Jane Austen. Like, I was really kind of, you know, pulling back from people. My audiobook is narrated by a gentleman by the name of Richard Armitage, who's an actor, and in England especially, but he's also been in the Hobbit movies and Ocean's 8 with Sandra Bullock. His voice is infamous as very rich, baritone, very emotive. And Peggy, what I will tell you is that the scenes in the audiobook that bring me to tears, I never shed a tear writing them or rereading them until I heard him bring them to life, because they were a lot of the interior monologues where Adeline's in the window seat and she's worried about herself, ability to move forward, or Dr. Gray's in the churchyard and he's realizing he has a problem he has to deal with. When Mr. Armitage read those parts for the audiobook, he reached me as a listener through his acting ability. That gave me a whole new respect for the acting talent, and is part of the joy of an audiobook, that they can bring to it a skill set that I don't have and that I don't hear. And I have to say, I just don't think anyone could have done a better job than him. The last thing to say about the audiobook, when I was writing my book, the voice I heard for Dr. Gray was Richard Armitage, especially a role he did in a series called North and South, which is a Victorian novel by Elizabeth Gaskell. And he was the voice of John Thornton, the romantic lead. And it's one of my absolute favorite TV series and miniseries. And he was very much an inspiration for Dr. Gray. So then when he messaged me through Twitter, said, I'm recording your book right now in London. I absolutely adore it. I love Dr. Gray. I needed smelling salts. I was a wreck. I was in LA with my husband, Mary, and there was like a time difference. And I was just like, I'm toast today. Like,
that's it. It's done. Done. Mic drop. I could just walk away.
Yeah.
How fun. And I know Karen, who you know is a huge fan, read it, but she's starting to listen to it now too. Yeah. And there are certain books where it plays so well to read it and listen to it. So even if you've read it or ordered the book, you can go on to Libro.fm and check out the audio. Yeah. So Natalie, I feel like we could sit here all night, but Alex probably would prefer to go home at some point. Thank you so much for taking the time to hang out with us. I just, gosh, I really could talk about this book and about you and about your bookstore and all of these wonderful things all night long. But I'm going to sign off and thank all of you for joining us. And I'm going to let Alex take us away.
Well, thank you both. That was so wonderful. I loved every minute of that. And just I did A, B, C, and D before about things we have in common. Yeah. I also get up at 5 o'clock every morning, and that's when I write as well. So it's 5 for 5. And I agree with you about the audiobooks. My last book was read by an Englishman called Raphael Corkill, and he did such an incredible job. And it's always fascinating to me how people, how much there is to interpret still, even when you can't change a word.
No,
the genius of these people, and they are, it's just amazing. And you hear these things like, I wrote that sounds quite good. Extraordinary. So I co-sign on all of that. So, all right. Well, thank you both. Thank you, Natalie, so much. It's been such a joy. And Mary, thank you as always for a wonderful job. Everybody at home, thank you very much for watching. We love to do these online events, but in order to continue doing them, we really do need your support. So please do, if you can, buy a book from us, maybe 2. That would be great. So you can call us at 573-777-6990 or drop us a line at mail@skylarkbookshop.com, and we will be happy to sell you any book you like. Don't forget to tune in next week for Christina Baker-Klein and also for Caroline Levitt the next day. Thank you again for a wonderfully entertaining evening. Thank you all for watching. And Jane Austen Society, fabulous book. See you next week. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Good night.